In late 2025, the global economic stage braced for a confrontation unlike any before. Tensions that had simmered for years between the world's largest economies were about to erupt into a new and unpredictable conflict, sending shockwaves through financial markets and governments worldwide. Washington stunned the world by announcing sweeping secondary sanctions. These measures targeted not just Russia, but any nation purchasing Russian oil that had been refined or shipped through China, dramatically expanding the scope of the trade war. The goal was clear: squeeze Russia's vital energy revenues and punish China for its deepening alliance with Moscow. By targeting the flow of oil, the US aimed to hit both adversaries where it hurt most. This marked a dramatic escalation, striking at energy, the very lifeblood of the global economy. The world's dependence on oil meant that any disruption could have far-reaching consequences. Allies in Europe and Asia, already battered by wild swings in energy prices, watched anxiously. Many feared another spike in fuel costs, rising inflation, and the possibility of economic instability spreading across continents. For the White House, this was more than just policy. It was a calculated show of dominance on the world stage. Yet, officials knew the risks were enormous, with the potential to backfire both economically and diplomatically. In Beijing, the move was seen as far more than a trade dispute. It was a direct challenge to China's sovereignty, its global ambitions, and its right to shape the international order. Chinese leaders viewed the sanctions as economic aggression, a provocation and a test of their nation's resolve. The pressure was on to respond decisively. Around the globe, governments and markets waited for China's response. The world knew that this time, the answer would come not in words, but in bold, unmistakable action. The stage was set for a strategic showdown, one that would be fought with power, not negotiation, and could reshape the balance of power for years to come. China was ready to answer forcefully, signaling to the world that it would not back down in the face of pressure, but would meet strength with strength. China's answer came as a surge of electricity, not a press release. State media broadcast footage of the Three Gorges and other megadams running at full tilt. The message: China's industrial engine could run on its own power, immune to oil disruptions. For decades, China had built massive hydroelectric projects to shield itself from foreign energy pressure. These dams were more than infrastructure. They were strategic assets, immune to sanctions. While the US tried to choke fossil fuel flows, China flexed its 21st century energy independence. Factories kept humming, powered by rivers Washington couldn't touch. The American threat looked less like a decisive blow, more like a minor annoyance. China's hydroelectric gambit reframed the narrative resilience over vulnerability. Washington accused Beijing of colluding with Moscow to undermine Western sanctions. US officials claimed China was helping Russia evade penalties, threatening the global order. China countered their trade was legal, and US sanctions weren't backed by the UN. Beijing framed itself as a defender of sovereignty and free trade, a message that resonated with many in the global South. The world split, America enforcing its will, China championing a multipolar order. By sticking to international law, China made it hard for Washington to rally allies. Even US partners hesitated, wary of setting a precedent that could one day target them. China wasn't just defying America, it was building new alliances. The US secondary sanctions threatened not just adversaries, but also put pressure on allies and the entire global economy. These measures, designed to isolate certain countries, had ripple effects that extended far beyond their intended targets. Countries like South Korea and Germany faced a difficult dilemma: comply with Washington's demands and risk significant economic pain at home, or defy the US and face diplomatic fallout that could jeopardize long-standing alliances and trade relationships. China, as the world's manufacturing hub, was absolutely central to global supply chains. Its factories produced everything from electronics to clothing, making it a vital link in the world economy. Disrupting Chinese exports risked not only fuel shortages and price spikes, but also chaos in just-in-time delivery systems that businesses everywhere rely on. Even a small disruption could quickly snowball into widespread shortages and delays. The policy could trigger a massive supply shock, hurting everyone, including American consumers who might suddenly find everyday goods more expensive or unavailable. Ironically, these aggressive sanctions pushed countries to seek alternatives to the US dollar, accelerating its decline as the world's reserve currency and undermining America's financial influence. China and Russia responded by leading efforts to trade in their own currencies, building parallel financial systems, and encouraging other nations to join them in bypassing the dollar. In the process, the U.S. risked weakening its own economic foundation, as American businesses and workers felt the impact of lost markets and financial instability. The attempt to punish China threatened to backfire, straining alliances, fueling global uncertainty, and causing pain not just abroad, but at home as well. The law of unintended consequences loomed large, as each new sanction set off a chain reaction of unpredictable effects. The coalition Washington hoped to lead was now at risk of fracturing, as partners questioned whether the costs of unity were simply too high. China had already mastered the art of bypassing U.S. tariffs. Chinese firms shipped components to Vietnam or Mexico, where final assembly allowed goods to enter the U.S. under different labels. This great detour fueled factory booms in intermediary countries, often funded by Chinese capital. The result? U.S. imports from China fell, but imports from Mexico and Southeast Asia soared, still packed with Chinese parts. Tariffs didn't stop Chinese goods, they just rerouted them. The supply chain became more complex and opaque, obscuring true origins. The policy enriched intermediaries, not American manufacturers. Tariffs, a blunt tool, couldn't keep up with China's agile, adaptive strategies. While Washington built tariff walls, Beijing engineered bypasses. The U.S. found itself outmaneuvered in its own trade war. While the world obsessed over tariffs, China invested in technology and green energy. Beijing poured billions into solar, wind, electric vehicles, and batteries, cornering the market for the future. China now leads in solar panel and wind turbine production and dominates EV battery supply. This isn't just low-cost assembly. Chinese firms are innovating, filing patents, and setting global standards. By electrifying its economy and powering it with renewables, China reduces its dependence on imported fossil fuels. Each new wind farm or solar park insulates its factories from global shocks. The U.S. approach, by contrast, is fragmented and reactive. China's coordinated strategy builds a lasting competitive edge. It's chess versus checkers. China is thinking decades ahead. Step back, and the contrast is clear. On one side, America's infrastructure is visibly aging, while China's cities and transport networks are rapidly modernizing, symbolizing two very different economic paths. The U.S. relies heavily on tariffs, taxes that ultimately raise costs for its own consumers and businesses, making everyday goods more expensive and squeezing household budgets across the country. These protectionist policies have fueled inflation, making it harder for families to keep up, and have failed to bring manufacturing jobs back home, leaving many communities struggling with job losses and economic decline. Tax cuts, when paired with tariffs, have only deepened federal deficits and ballooned the national debt, creating long-term fiscal challenges that threaten future growth and stability. America's focus remains short-term, reactive, and often self-defeating, with political gridlock and constant policy shifts undermining confidence and making it difficult for businesses to plan ahead. China, meanwhile, plays the long game, investing strategically in infrastructure, renewable energy, and cutting-edge technology, laying the groundwork for sustained economic growth and global competitiveness. Its factories benefit from cheap, stable power and efficient logistics, making Chinese exports more competitive on the world stage and fueling the country's rapid industrial expansion. While the U.S. raises its own costs through policy choices, China systematically lowers its own, ensuring that both businesses and consumers enjoy greater affordability and economic security. The Russian oil dispute is just one chapter in a much larger story, a story of diverging strategies where China forges new alliances and secures resources, while the U.S. faces growing challenges. America leans on its financial power and sanctions to maintain influence, but China is busy building real assets, expanding its industrial capacity, and strengthening its economic foundations. As China fortifies its economic base with modern infrastructure and innovation, U.S. pressure looks increasingly futile, like a fragile picket fence trying to hold back a rising tide of global change.